college professors, what's your "I'm surprised you made it out of high school" story? Story 1. Not professor, so delete if this violates, but I was a teaching assistant for a biology course. We were learning about this species of animal, lake mollusk, I think, that could kind of choose how and when it wanted to lay eggs so that its young had the best chance of survival. Anyways, I overheard this girl talking to her lab mate in the lab about her boyfriend may have gotten someone pregnant. She and this boy had been together, according to her, for a little over a year, and hopefully we all know that it takes about 8 to 9 months to make a baby from the time of conception. So the girl's lab mate asked if she was going to break up with him since he cheated on her. This girl looks her straight in the face, no joke, and said, "He didn't cheat on me." Her lab mate was taken aback, but asked if maybe she had misheard. Nope. Long story short, this girl thought that humans could choose when to begin the moment of conception, and her boyfriend had told her that the baby hadn't been processed until after they'd gotten together and that he'd slept with this girl over a year and a half ago. She genuinely believed this story, using what he had learned in class about the mollusks as proof. I knew her as an acquaintance outside of this class, too, and last I heard, she was still with this guy, and yes, the baby is his. I had to tell a classmate that you don't pee out of your vagina. She was 23-ish. It came up because she made a very confusing statement about giving birth. Unfortunately, I don't remember what it was. Even if it were true that you could delay or choose the moment of conception, he's still contributing to that moment of conception. It's going to happen. He was a part of it, and she's still with him. Either this guy is really dumb or he's really putting his college classes to good use. According to him. It's not good use. It's not. Don't lie to your girlfriend. Story 2. Not a professor, but in undergrad, I had a sociology course where we had to do a group presentation about different types of family structures. We divided the work by tasking each group member with creating a slide on a subtopic for our PowerPoint. When it came time to practice, I had everyone send me their slide so I could put it together into one file. I noticed right away that something was off when a group member's slide had gems like, "Women's suffrage has destroyed the American family structure," and "Feminism has turned women away from their naturally obedient nature." What the hell? I asked to meet with a group member about why the heck his slide was a misogynistic rant, especially for a joint presentation in a group of 4 women at a pretty liberal school. Even if he believed this hogwash, there's no way he thought it wouldn't backfire in a presentation in front of the whole class. Well, I met with him, and he sheepishly admitted that he had just Googled American family structure and copy and pasted from the first website he saw. He didn't realize it was offensive. He hadn't read anything on the slide that he had just sent to the group to present. I didn't believe him at first, but I found the website that he used, and he quite literally just copied from some random angry incel's personal website. It was a group grade, so I just ended up doing his slides for him. He read what I gave him verbatim, and we got an A. I took the grade and was relieved and never worked with him again. This is the first story in this thread, I believe. Oh, the things I've seen copy-pasta in academics. Copy-pasta. The thing I've seen copy-pasta in academics. Oh, this is just copy-pasta from someone's website. Can you imagine what kind of presentations you're going to look at now when you do AI? Could you imagine someone who's just surreptitiously giving their presentation by just quickly getting AI, find me something on American family structure, and the AI looks on the website and comes up with it right there in the class? That's going to be super embarrassing. Story 3. I worked at my university writing center and saw a lot of really terrible writing. So many poorly written essays. I really don't know how you could graduate from high school without at least being able to perform simple tasks like point to your thesis statement. The whole point of a writing center was to teach students to correct their own work. But there was a direct correlation between how awful a paper was and how likely the student was to throw it at you and say, "I'm going to go have lunch. Will you have it fixed in an hour?" Then try to leave. The tutors all got really good at an authoritative, "Stop right there. Sit down. Now let's talk about how you are going to improve your paper." The most frustrating papers were the science majors. I can never tell if the paper was terrible or I just wasn't following the details of their experiment on chlorinated aliphatic hydrocarbons or whatever. The absolute worst was the English master's degree student who came in several times with absolute gibberish. To be fair, English was his second language, but are you absolutely sure you don't want to consider a career change, my good sir? Again, we're talking about people just throwing stuff at tutors. Can you imagine all the stuff they have to face when they're trying to pass off AI-generated stuff as their own work? Or maybe even saying, "Hey, this is my own work, just tell me how good it is." No, this is going to be really interesting. What do you think AI is going to do to affect the schooling situation? Let me know. Story 4. My first year teaching, I had a student who failed the previous year due to missing too many cooking labs to pass and not handing in half the assignments. I had rewritten the curriculum and assignments. I noticed that this student hadn't been handing certain things in and had been skipping my lectures, so I decided to have a chat with him. They thought their marks for that semester were cumulative with their previous year's marks, with a different curriculum, different assignments, and a different professor, so they just had to make up enough marks to get a passing grade. This is a post-grad program. They had a BSc in dietetics. I busted my butt getting my BS in dietetics. I didn't get licensed because I couldn't handle the internship process. This person went into a master's program. Now I'm sad. Story 5. Was teaching a first-year religion class and we were talking about the 2 creation stories in Genesis. But this happened specifically when we were reading the story of Adam and Eve in the garden. I told my class that a colleague of mine joked Adam had a C-section because he wasn't conscious when God took his rib and made Eve. The class had a giggle, but one student raised their hand and seriously asked why everyone was laughing, because men have the ability to regrow their ribs once in their life thanks to this original moment. I felt horrible. The entire class started laughing, and I immediately shut that stuff down because this student was wanting to melt away into nothingness. It was a great teaching moment because you never, ever laugh if someone has a question and is serious about it. Turns out, their Nana was a Jehovah's Witness, and while my student generally took everything that came out of Nana's mouth with a grain of salt, somehow this fact never got examined. You're a good one. People need to be able to express their thoughts without being shamed. This is why people have trouble with critical thinking. They can do it, but they're too afraid of being wrong and laughed at to share. Story 6. I was a lecturer at a prestigious R1 state university. Some of my students were excellent, most average, and a few were barely literate. One particularly heartbreaking example comes to mind. I had a football player in class and he could barely write on the sentence level. I think he had just never been expected to learn how to write since he was an athlete. When he failed his first paper, he came to me and asked how to improve. We agreed that he'd come to my office hours and we would work through the process of writing a research paper together. Y'all, this kid worked so hard. Every week he'd show up and we'd talk about how to write an intro paragraph and how to build evidence in the body of a paper, etc. He wasn't going to get an A in my class or anything, but he was definitely on track for a C-, with a little extra recognition for how hard he worked all semester. When he turned in his final paper, he had significantly improved over his previous paper. I pulled him aside and asked him about his process this time around. With absolutely no guile, he told me that he told his brother what he wanted to say, and his brother wrote it down for him. I was bound by the Honors Council and a sense of duty to my other students to do what I saw as the ethical thing, which was to fail him, but I do think about him sometimes, and that was 20 years ago. He tripped at the very last step. I had similar experiences with athletes at the R1 I was a TA and occasional instructor for. They just kept getting passed along because they were talented athletes, and some could barely write a sentence. I'm not a sports guy, I don't follow sports, but I do know some names that have gone on from having an athletic career to being great business people, very successful businesses. It's possible. What do you think? Do you have any experiences in sports and education? Do you think it's that difficult for some sports athletes to be passed over just because they're talented and skip on their education? Story 7. I had a student who told me, being 100% serious, that he wouldn't be presenting on his assigned day because he, quote, didn't do the assignment and he'd go the next day, unquote. The presentation had been given with due dates over 2 weeks earlier. When I told him that wasn't how college worked, he claimed discrimination and told me he had accommodations for his disability that allowed him more time. Once he pulled that card, I got the department head involved and she laughed. The guy failed. To clarify, he got double time on exams to allow for a learning disability. It doesn't excuse him from deciding not to do the work necessary for the class. Okay, and as someone who does have accommodations, the etiquette is to ideally ask before the assignment is due and explain that you're having issues with it. If you have to ask on the day of, you leave it to the instructor's discretion whether they take marks off or not. Story 8. Not a professor, but I used to TA for undergrad organic chem lab courses. Had a challenging student once who was not great at reading directions or thinking critically. We were setting up an experiment that required gentle heating of a volatile solvent. I explicitly told the class multiple times, only turn your hot plates up to 2 when heating. These things get very hot. Maybe 30 minutes later, I'm making my rounds through the lab, and I pass said guy's fume hood and notice his reaction is smoking. I look closer and see that all of the liquid in his flask is gone, and it's just a charred black smoking mess, which is still heating. I ask, "Student, what's going on with your reaction? What's the temperature set at?" The guy goes, "Oh, I wasn't sure how hot to heat it, so I just turned the plate all the way up to 10. Is my reaction going to be okay?" No, man, it's not going to be okay. He literally boiled the thing dry. If you ever want students to pay attention to what you're saying during your pre-lab chat, something like, if you want to get out of lab early, make sure you do this. Works like a charm every time. Story 9. I used to work at an English help lab at my university. I had no problem helping the English as a second language students because they had a tough challenge working outside their primary language. What killed me is how some of these native English-speaking kids got out of high school still writing incomplete sentences, run-ons, tense disagreements, and having basic vocabulary and grammar errors. I went to an engineering school, so yes, some of these guys probably were good at math and bad at English, but you still need to be able to communicate. I don't have any one good story, but I will say that there was no pattern. Inner city kids, suburban kids, country kids, East Coast, West Coast, South, North, Midwest, whatever. All have the capacity to graduate high school and still write incoherently. One of the most unexpected culture shocks I had upon entering the cubicle world was the astonishing number of mid to late career professionals who seem to think punctuation, spelling, and coherent sentences are optional when you're sending an email. Of course, I grew up without this. It happened later on in my life, but computers really have all this corrective little signals and squiggly lines and everything when you're writing stuff out. About how many people do you think enter the working world that just rely on words, little red and blue squiggly lines to help them write sentences? Have you ever worked with someone that couldn't write a complete sentence? Story 10. Holy hell, just got one. So I teach both in person and online classes. Our course uses Moodle as our course organization thingy, and the ebook we use for the online section of the course I teach is through another website. So you need to buy the access code, go to their website, and do assignments there. To ease with the access of the site, I recorded a video of myself navigating Moodle, mock purchasing the ebook code, going to the website, registering the code, and navigating the ebook showing all aspects of the site to the students. I then posted that video, so it's quite literally the first thing you see in the Moodle page. Fast forward a couple of semesters to this one. The midterm opens up on February 15th and closes 30 days later. I get an email from a student to the effect of, "Hey, so I've been waiting for you to upload materials to Moodle only to find out it's an ebook? I'm confused and don't know how to get access to it. Like, there's legit no way to make up half of the material before the end of midterm access. Whenever the world idiot-proofs something, the world makes a better idiot. My father." Story 11. I teach at a community college that doesn't actually require a high school diploma to attend, so I've seen a lot. Mostly, it's native English speakers who are virtually illiterate. No abstract or critical thinking skills at all. One wrote a paper about the causes of the Salem witch trials. She sided with the accusers because she'd, quote, seen some stuff, unquote, clearly not understanding the assignment. Another insisted I approve every word he wrote to make sure he was doing it right, when in reality he was wanting me to feed him answers since he didn't do the reading. Yet another wrote in a discussion board about Lord of the Flies, "I like how they saved all the flies. That was my favorite part." If you've read the book, you can guess the look on my face. Story 12. I have a bunch of over-ego jerkwads who think they're the stuff because they were the best coder in the high school, then whine and complain at the assignments I give them. They never admit they're not as good as they thought they were. They never admit they need help. They just whine that "I looked at an industry code once and it didn't look like this," or something about their imaginary internship with Google. So they never get the help they need, and they never try because they think they're better than the degree. Maybe they were the best programmers in their high school, but in college, pretty much everyone here was the best programmers in their high school as well. I think that could be symptomatic of them never really being pushed before. I've noticed that when people coast for the longest time on natural ability without really facing true opposition, they're the first ones to either give up or blame the issue on someone else. I can totally agree with that. If you have never been challenged in what you're doing, are you really any good at it? If you think it always comes easy, it's going to be a big surprise when you actually have to do something where you actually have to think about what the answer is. I think that's when you really see how people will deal with this subject or deal with their talents. What do you think? Story 13. Student handed in a one-page essay of complete gibberish, like utter stream of consciousness of a gerbil on LSD kind of garbage. After receiving an F on this assignment, this muffin had the audacity to come to my office hours and demand that I explain this grade to them. After I walked them through their river of word garbage, they tried to tell me that I just didn't understand their writing because I am not an English native speaker. First time I almost kicked somebody out of my office. Not a professor, but college instructor. First time I've heard the word muffin used as a pejorative term.
Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 14. Worked as a TA for a group of professors who taught a new remedial algebra class for students who had a non-traditional pre-college experience or who hadn't taken enough math in high school to take even basic college-level math. I didn't work much with students. My work consisted mostly of grading and doing the homework assignments and working exam problems to catch errors or things that might confuse people. An early section on exponents really tripped up one student. When a professor saw his grade, he instructed me to meet with the student to try and help him get on course. Upon reviewing his exam, I realized he had problems with negative numbers. I quickly sketched up a lesson about how exponents worked with negative numbers, but I was floored when his first question was, "What are negative numbers?" I spent an hour and a half working with him to no effect. I'm not even sure he even believed there was such a thing as a negative number. Later in the semester, he failed to grasp the idea that fractions had decimal equivalents, had no hint of how to approach a story problem, missed every exam problem involving percentages, and usually butchered the use of parentheses and brackets. He got a 13 out of 180 on the final. That's 7.22% for math wizards of this guy's stature. I feel personally attacked by that last sentence. Story 15. Not a prof, but I have to share this. I was sitting in the rec sauna with two random dudes. One was reading a paper. He was reading an article about how the city was planning to pump in water from a lake 60 miles away to meet demand. He looks up at me and the other guy. "What exactly is the difference between a lake and a river?" The second dude, "A river moves fast, but a lake moves slow." Astonished, I said, "A river flows, typically to the ocean, but a lake is a body of water. It doesn't flow anywhere." He stared at me with a blank look, then turned to the other dude. "Say again what you said, 'cause that sounded right." Another dude, "Yeah, dog, a river just moves fast, but a lake moves slow." I then felt a portion of hope leave my body. You are wrong. Most lakes do flow into a river that drains them, just slowly. Lakes in endorheic basins don't flow, but they are the minority of lakes. Story 16. Here's a bit of a role reversal. I'm not a professor, but a student. And the professor was the one that made me question a few things. Looking back, he may have just had a brain fart, as he was very intelligent math-wise and will remain one of my favorite professors. One day, in his Calculus 1 class, someone asked him a question regarding a homework problem, and he decided to draw an example on the whiteboard. His example had to deal with the angles of light that affect the length of a shadow cast by a pole. It was a nice diagram, except for one thing. He put the light source on the same side of the pole as the shadow. Every student who was paying attention was thinking the same thing. Then someone pointed it out. My professor disagreed. The rest of the class began to chip in. The professor then proceeded to try and convince a class of calculus students that a shadow is cast toward the light source. For half an hour. My brain melted. I think he ended up giving up and just moving on. This dude probably realized his mistake and lost sleep over it for weeks. Story 17. I have taught numerous students who are unable to read for meaning. They can read the words on a page out loud to you, but if you ask them to explain what they just read, they'll repeat the words on the page. Our country's education system is very broken. Even worse than that is a group of students who had already graduated from university doing their teaching requirements to become school teachers. Had more than one ask me what a variable in an experiment is. How have you got a science degree and you have never performed an experiment in your life? My lowest point definitely was the day when a class discussion on the difference between science and superstition dissolved into chaos. The majority of the class of science graduates agreed that science is rubbish and superstition makes more sense. When asked how they would teach science when they don't believe in it, one student said she's just there to tell the class facts to memorize. I was a student in that course and I honestly felt sick during that class. I want to teach. I'm a fantastic teacher, but knowing that people like this are my peers makes me really sad and angry. Story 18. I was a TA for 2 years. One of my students, outside of class, explained that she and her whole family truly believes that microwaves mutate the DNA of your food. They don't. And mutated DNA is dangerous to eat. It wouldn't be. I couldn't help myself from calling her out. It was such a strange thing that it didn't even occur to me to be sensitive. I just said she clearly needed to take my biology class again. My mother always complained about the dangers of food cooking and cell phone microwaves. And she recently bought an infrared sauna. Sometimes all you can do is laugh. Story 19. Professor at a middle-of-nowhere medium-sized state school with an 80-ish% acceptance rate. Had a graduate student who couldn't code for the life of him, but was a software engineer at an undisclosed incredibly large aviation company. He couldn't accept that other students who didn't have jobs were better than him and that the people grading him didn't have jobs. Sent unaliving threats because we failed him on an assignment where his code didn't run. He complained to the higher-ups and got a C. I bet he was covertly outsourcing his job for a fraction of his salary and was pocketing the difference. Either that, or he was lying about his career. Story 20. For a couple years, I taught first-year college students in an engineering program, the majority of whom didn't know how to do unit conversions. Not even like inches to centimeters. To repeat, college engineering. My ex was an engineer. They pretty much let everyone into the program in difficult classes just to collect tuition and let them fail out. They prided themselves on how hard the school was, but in reality, it was just padded by people who shouldn't have been accepted. Story 21. Not me, but a friend who taught in the politics department received a paper about guerrilla warfare in South America. Gorilla. It was so poorly written she couldn't tell if it was a typo or if they genuinely thought Colombia had been overrun by a Planet of the Apes-style revolution. Edit to add, this was in the UK, and English was the student's first language. My mother and I were once watching the news, and there was a story about Lebanese guerrillas. She said, "Ain't that awful? Women on women." Story 22. Not a professor, but as a college freshman, I took advanced English with a student who didn't know how to write a research paper or even possibly read. I don't know. When I realized she didn't know how to research, I gave her my sources and showed her how to navigate them. The next class, when we were supposed to edit each other's rough drafts, I handed her my paper to edit. She gave it back to me after 10 seconds without reading it and said it was good. She then handed me her paper, and it was just a list of random dates. Story 23. Not a professor, but we were doing peer editing in English 102. I got an essay on why self-unaliving being illegal was stupid. I still remember the opening line 15 years later. There are plenty of, our word for mentally challenged, of laws. I stared at that sentence wondering what to do and realizing how low my school standards of admission were. Oh my deity, this is my favorite comment so far. Story 24. My friend's student teacher, early 20s, about to graduate college, is working in a lower elementary classroom and spells words wrong all the time. Everyone can have a brain fart now and then, but this is a few words every day. Here she is teaching the kids, and there are misspelled words on the board every day. Honestly, I wouldn't hire her. Being a good speller should be one of your skills when you go into elementary teaching. Story 25. I had a student include numerous emojis in a term paper. A different student came to my office a week after the final and asked me why she had failed the course. She hadn't turned in a single assignment or written the final. I did once write a short paper on the use of an interpretation of emoji over time. It was a nice excuse to use them in a serious academic paper. Story 26. In the final year of high school, I had to intervene during a practical exam when a student attempted to heat a plastic petri dish of water using the blue flame of a Bunsen burner. That student is a PE teacher now. I read this twice, and the second time the first paragraph was even more painful, and your concluding comment even more relieving. Story 27. Not a teacher, but a friend of mine is. First story. Master's student didn't know how to convert from seconds to minutes. Second story. No one from a class of 4 PhD students in an engineering field knew how to add two 2D vectors. This comment cured my imposter syndrome. Story 28. My wife has had multiple students who are fundamentally technologically illiterate. Numerous students have had no idea how to use Word or Excel, including ones who use their email as a word processor. The university provides students with Office. There have also been students who struggle with installing programs on computers. What's disconcerting is it's becoming an increasingly common issue. As an older millennial, the idea that kids are becoming less technologically proficient is so bizarre. Story 29. I taught English as a second language at a community college for a decade. My colleagues and I were pretty tough on the academics, but it paid off when our students started regular classes. Often, I ran into my former students around campus and asked them how things were going. I lost count of the number of times they expressed disbelief at how badly their native-speaking American classmates were at writing sentences, doing math, and giving presentations in front of a group. Story 30. Not a professor, but in undergrad, I was taking an American history course. Our professor was from Maryland and was probably in her early 40s. This kid asked her if she was one of the Pearl Harbor survivors. He couldn't grasp the fact that she was very much not alive at that time and that Pearl Harbor was not a harbor in Maryland. Story 31. I once got an exam essay that mentioned how much Mandela hated the Jews. After scratching my head for a bit and wondering if I'd missed some obvious signs of his anti-Semitism, I realized she meant Mengele, as in Joseph Mengele, the Nazi angel of death. Had to think of a worse person she could have confused him for. Story 32. There have been disturbingly high numbers of students on a performance-based music degree who can't read music. Not musicologists or conceptual composers who could in theory get away with it. No. These were people turning up expecting to study Western classical performance. There was even a master's student once. Story 33. Not a college professor, but I worked in my university's writing center for a while. I had a girl come in with a research paper bibliography that listed my mom as a source several times. When I pressed, she told me her mom looked up everything and sent it to her, and she just put it in the paper. She told me she had always done it this way. Story 34. Once had identical twin sisters who turned in identical essays. Both were directly plagiarized from a Google search and received identical zeros. At least they stuck to their theme. Story 35. I used to TA physics. I had a student who had gone to a decent private high school tell me the value of pi was 2.28. I can kind of understand the 0.28 because that's 2 pi, but I did not know where the 2 came from. Story 36. My graduate school classmate wrote, "America is a country that has been around for thousands of years." It was a group paper on social policy.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.